We're going to be recording this webinar. You'll be getting a link after as a follow-up in your email. Today, we're going to have a sort of a, to the best of our ability, a virtual roundtable discussion. Maureen Darras is here, who will be our moderator and guiding us through the flow of the agenda. We have the goal today is really to come together, to learn, listen, explore what this could mean in the United States, hear from folks who've been doing some research. We'll hear some practical applications by Minsun Ji and Valerio Pellirossi. We'll open up the floor for some questions, some engagement. We'll hear from Jerome Hughes about some of the legal implications. We'll try to open up the floor again for some engagement, and then we'll close out and wrap up. So thank you and welcome thank you for being here and welcome, and I'll pass the mic to Maureen.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us. For those who don't know, this is our second webinar on this topic. Our first social cooperatives webinar link will be shared as part of the follow-up resources you'll receive after attending this session. And for those who are new to the idea, I'll repeat the definition that was shared by Minsun Ji at our first webinar on this topic a few months ago. Social cooperatives are cooperatives that advance the public interest and social mission, such as serving a marginalized community, as their main purpose. As she also highlighted, this is connected to Principle 7, concern for community, but today's conversation will go deeper in what it means to center those values in cooperative development and what institutional support could look like for this model. We're really excited to welcome you back, Minsun Ji, as well as Professor Jerome Hughes, who was also with us in part 1, and welcome to our new guest, Valerio Pellirossi. Coming from the worker-owner cooperative perspective here at the Federation, we're really excited to host this conversation. We want our movement to learn about the argument for developing social cooperatives in the US, best practices and lessons learned from the international context, legislative or policy reform that would be needed to unlock the potential for this movement in the US. And the way we're going to work through it today is Minsun and Valerio will share context from social cooperative implementation in South Korea and Italy. Then we'll open the floor to questions. Then we'll more broadly open the floor to a general discussion, inviting 2 other guests of ours, Professor Jerome Hughes and Elias Crim, to weigh in on how this is all landing for those who have been part of this 2-part conversation and for those joining us today. So without further ado, I want to thank our membership department led by our membership director, Tehmina, for organizing this conversation, our USFWC leadership for coordinating these partnerships and always identifying these kinds of potential for our movement to grow nationally and internationally. And I want to pass the mic to Minsun and Valerio. Thank you for joining us today for this first part of the discussion on the international context. Minsun, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Minsun Ji. I'm the Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. I'm very honored to be part of this discussion. I'm South Korean, so I travel South Korea a lot to learn about their social economy movement. And I've been very inspired by what could actually happen here in the US. So I will actually share what I have learned about one case in South Korea, which is social care sectors. So let me, should I just go first or just is only for introduction?
You can go.
Should I just go ahead? I go ahead? Okay, sounds good. All right, so can you see this? Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, all right. So again, I actually go to South Korea a lot. I take students to South Korea to teach them about the social cooperatives and other social economy movements, along with the labor movement as well. So today, actually, I'm going to talk about why actually social economies, especially social cooperatives, are growing rapidly in South Korea. As you know, it is growing rapidly because of the fact that South Korea went through a global financial crisis in 1997. And then there was another global crisis that happened in 2028. After experiencing those two crises, Korean government especially start thinking about how we do economy differently. Since then, there are a lot of legislations that passed in South Korea to create a little bit different kind and diverse economies that actually support the real peoples. When I say real peoples, I mean very small businesses, mom and pop stores, right? So this is a kind of a chart of how actually we evolve from passing self-help enterprise movement all the way to social cooperatives. But here is a sort of the more breakdown of social economy laws that got passed over the past 20 years. The very first National Basic Living Standard Act actually passed in 1997, right after the economic crisis. And then do you see the next one was actually a Social Enterprise Promotion Act that passed in 2027. What that means is that for the first time in Asia, South Korea defined how actually the country as a whole could actually support social enterprises. And the government started supporting and defining those social enterprises for the first time. And then 2011, that's when actually the South Korea government passed a Village Community Act, meaning that now, okay, we have a lot of social enterprise that are happening in different pockets of South Korea, but now we want the whole village to be organized as a cooperative. So they actually passed a Village Community Act, which increased a lot of different village social enterprises in South Korea. And then the critical part is actually the Framework Act on Cooperative in 2012. That's when we define actually worker cooperatives for the first time and also include social cooperatives. So then if you look at this statistic, this is actually as of today. Total of actually cooperatives grew to 26,696 just because of this law, the Framework Act on Cooperatives. A lot of cooperatives were created because of that co-op law that passed in 2012. But look at these social cooperatives. As of today, we have 5,306 social cooperatives and 29 social cooperative associations and network in South Korea. So you can imagine how rapidly we actually grew. So this is sort of the graph, right? Starting in 2018 and all the way right now, it's much, much large numbers, 5,306 social cooperatives as of today. So why will actually some of the enterprises will actually convert their enterprises to social cooperatives, right? I mean, that is actually the big questions. Social cooperatives in South Korea has a few characteristics. Social cooperatives in South Korea register as a nonprofit. So we're gonna go about that later on. And also, at least 40% of all the activities have to be dedicated to serving public benefit. And there is no required minimal initial capitals to be put in. And also, any one individual's initial equity buy-in cannot actually exceed the 30% of the total capital that is needed to create a social cooperatives. And another interesting point about this is no distribution of individual dividends. And I'll show you how actually then the profit get redistributed back to members. Because of this no distribution of individual dividends, the way that actually social cooperatives work is that they increase the salaries of the members. That's kind of how actually do it. And of course, the social cooperatives can also apply for certified social enterprise status as well. But that is actually optional. So if you really look at the breakdown, the biggest portion of social cooperatives are in health and social welfare service, 39%. And then 21% goes to educational service, right? As you know, there are a lot of marginalized kids without a lot of good education support. So there are a lot of different social cooperatives that are created to support those marginalized kids and peoples for educational purposes. And then there's a business management facility and other support. So I want to talk about one fantastic social cooperative examples. I wrote this case a few years ago, and I actually had an interview with the founder of this co-op a few days ago, and I was very inspired. And when actually Do Nuri was established in 2013, why do you think they would actually convert to a social cooperative? Because they were formed as a social enterprise. Do you remember? We actually passed a social enterprise promotion law in 2008, 2007. So Do Nuri, as a sort of the care sector enterprise, registered as a social enterprise in 2008. But then, as soon as actually general Coop law was passed in 2012, they immediately switched over to social cooperatives. It's really interesting how actually South Korea create a social cooperatives under this general cooperative. So that is a set categories of the social cooperatives that they pass. As of today, Do Nuri has a cooperative members of 937 people. And Do Nuri is a sort of the center, social care to take care of the elderly, the disabled, and then also the newly mothers and the kids. As of today, they service provide of over 24,000 people. And as of today, they actually run 18 center programs. And then now start actually developing social franchising program as well. And now their social franchising brand name is a Care Nuri. So this is the sort of the breakdown of their services. In-home care centers, that means that actually the members actually visit different home to give a bath, also cook and care for the elderly and the disabled and the sick. Nursing home, this is a very big, large actually nursing home facilities that they have in South Korea. And then they also have a very big, large hospital daycare centers, 2 of them. And then they have 2 child care centers. So total center is actually 18. So out of those 18 centers that they actually operate, their direct operation number is 12 centers. And then they got a government contract to operate 6 different facilities of all this stuff. So you can imagine how big this social care sector has become. The founder actually told me that actually right now, because of their size, they are actually expanding to create other support systems, such as child developmental centers, nursing education center. As actually they are growing more nursing homes, they need to actually educate the nurses to be part of that systems. And then Co-op Education Center, Welfare Center means that a lot of members come with information seeking, right? So welfare centers will provide a lot of residents to get necessary information about benefits and how they can also use these kind of centers. And then Care Plus centers that actually do a lot of others, plus actually run a few stores for products. So the question is actually why actually you choose to move on to a social co-op, because they were actually social enterprise. Social enterprise got actually good benefit as well from the government. But here is the answers that the founder gave me. So this is all about sort of the caring people, right? So when you actually care for people, that sort of the profit notion disappears. That is, of course, it's good to actually have profit, but that is not the first priority issue for them. So when actually you look at their chart, people-centered care, these are the vision, right? And then creating a democratic workplace so that the members who are working as caregivers will get also a high income as well. And then total service to benefit the community, meaning that actually they really focus on supporting other community. Do you remember the seventh principle is the concept for others? They really want to emphasize that, so that so for them, social cooperative was a perfect way to do so. And they like the idea that actually it goes with a nonprofit to make sure that actually there is actually clear purposes. So this is a chart, right? If you go with the social cooperatives, it is a form that right now is a nonprofit. That means that actually there will be a lot of grants and supports that you can get. Social enterprise will actually give you a choice to go with a profit or nonprofit. So that is one piece that I think we should discuss, right? How do we want to design our social cooperatives? Do we actually give that social cooperatives also for-profit status? That's a piece that I think we need to work out with the time. So this is actually governance structures. So members are 937 members. Most of them are coming from marginalized community. They are the peoples, some of them are disabled, some of them are very low wage residents who need a job in care sectors. And so out of those almost 1,000 members, they actually select 62 representatives. As you know, they have 18 different centers. So they will actually select representatives. And then there is a CEO. And then out of this 62 representatives, they select 14 board members who govern this whole thing. And CEO staff, I put the 6 staff. So those 832 people are also members. So do you remember that employees? So still there are some employees, right, who are actually the member of this co-op. But then out of these 619 employee members, there are 318 non-employee members. So I asked who these people are, and these are the supporters like me. Like I don't have to be part of the co-op, but I support this mission. Therefore, I will actually donate, right, contribute. And because of that, they will actually give me a membership. And the other piece is that a lot of employees who retire, they want to continue to support the co-op. So then they are now moving from employees to supporter members. So that's kind of how they operate. So role of the government is that they have actually preferential procurement policy that was enacted a long time ago, around 2012 and 13. So they get a preferential procurement. That's why they are running 6 different nursing home centers in South Korea. And obviously there is roles of the sort of the funding, right? All the social cooperatives and social enterprises in South Korea actually get some initial funding. Right now, Doonuri is such a big organization that is successful. So they don't actually depend on the initial funding to start up the cooperative. However, a lot of different startup cooperatives will actually go with the funding. So funding for 5 years. So 2 years before creating a social co-op, and then 3 years after creating social cooperatives. And then they also provide marketing and sales support. As you know, this kind of care sectors has a very, very tight profit margin. So a lot of government sectors are working to promote these social cooperatives so that the more people are using those facilities, so that the social cooperatives can be stabilized. So I want to kind of finish up with why actually social cooperatives. And the more I think about it, it really comes down to sort of what mission do you have in your work, right? If you're actually profit seeking is not the #1 goal for your enterprise, perhaps it is okay to go with a nonprofit, because then you can actually seek support from individual donors and also other foundations. In Korea, the size of those actually philanthropy sectors is much smaller than right here in the United States. yet it is growing. And also another thing, I kind of want to finish up with his quotations. Converting to social cooperative allow us to be creative and allow us to imagine what could be possible. The fact that we are able to imagine, dream a world that we want to be was the most powerful benefit that our social cooperative provided to us. I keep thinking about the founder's remark. He said to me that it was very important for our members, staff, to have a very democratic workplace. And also they are getting good wages. This social cooperative has been designated as the best social cooperatives in South Korea last year as well. So you can see how actually social cooperatives are growing rapidly. So yeah, that's kind of my presentations, and I will, get some question later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And for those in the audience, please prepare your questions. Next, we're going to hear from Valerio about the context in Italy. And then afterwards, we'll open the floor to field your questions. Go ahead, Valerio. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I was really, really happy to participate to this webinar, to give my contribution. So happy to have this connection with the US movement that I'm actually off the work, but I took a couple of hours for you. I was the office is actually closed, so but I was very happy to give you my contribution in the debate today. And I also had the chance to be part of to join the US delegation last June in Bologna. That they were here for a trip with Esteban Kelly too. And I have a presentation that I will use as a way to present you some features about the Italian situation. I'll explain you a bit about social cooperatives, but also what is moving beyond it. So we have also, I'll spoil something. We have also a debate on community cooperatives, which is a new recognition for cooperatives, especially those committing to the revamping marginalized area. So still, cooperatives is the form to fight against marginalization of people or areas. And also we have like this spread of new ideas, a new way of using the cooperative tool and the cooperation as an engagement of people for a fairer society and a fairer economy. You should see my presentation now. Can you confirm? There we are. So really briefly, on the definition of social cooperatives. So we start from here. This is like the International Cooperative Alliance definition of cooperative sectors. Well, social cooperatives are those working in the provision of services in general for health and care, and also working in the field of the industry, craft, and services. So it's like a hybrid between very specialized enterprises in care and worker cooperatives, but committing to the inclusion of marginalized people with the type B social cooperatives. But I would like to make a step back to the 70s and 80s. There's really an important moment where like something changed the paradigm. We use a lot this phrase of changing the paradigm, but this is actually something really important for the social cooperative experience. You see on the left picture Franco Basaglia. It was a doctor that worked in the mental hospital, in med houses, and he started to think that a different way to treat people and to approach to people, and discovering that it was possible to give a chance to people to be active, to be cured, to be included instead of excluded from the society. So you can see in the two pictures the very same people, but that on the left you have those that were closed in mental houses, in med homes, and on the right you have the very same people with mental illness, but that now are, thanks to also to the social cooperatives, part of they are active in their life. They have a role. They are not just treated and excluded by society, but they are included. They work and they live their life like everyone else. That was really the revolution. I made a step back to that age, to that period, because, of course, in the 70s and 80s, there was the first step of the social cooperatives that created the context of the spread of the phenomenon for the next years. And now we count in Italy about 15,000 social cooperatives. In Italy, it's important that we focus a bit on pillars, because in the law of 1991, the right definition of pillars enabled the spread of social cooperatives. So given the struggle in US to set the right scheme for the model to operate in that context, it's important to highlight that in Italy it was possible because for them it was recognized that they were enterprises like any other enterprises, so not charities, not association, not operating in the field of volunteers, but they were not for-profit enterprises. So this means that they can generate a turnover, they can pay employees, they can pay wages, but they must reinvest their profits in their activity. Their activity is committed to a general interest mission. This is really important. Legislators in Italy recognize that having an activity in a certain field is of interest. So I decide to give a favorable tax scheme and to enable not-for-profit enterprises to operate in the field, because I recognize that curing people, providing care and assistance to marginalized people, like you mentioned, that are elderly people, not self-sufficient, persons with disabilities, give shelter to those suffering addiction, or, for example, fighting school dropouts. These are typical activities of social cooperatives, and enterprises, not-for-profit enterprises operating in that sector are fulfilling a general interest mission. Moreover, they have a multi-stakeholder. So social cooperatives can engage workers, but they also have volunteers as members. They also have founding members, so investors. They also have public administration, but they must be independent from public administration. So a municipality can be part of a social cooperative, but they can never get the control of the social cooperative. And they also are democratic. They have a democratic and participatory identity. As I told you, we have different type of members in social cooperatives in Italy. I forgot about users and beneficiaries. They can also be members of social cooperatives. And these are the very famous two types of social cooperatives active in Italy. So the type A social cooperatives are those mainly dealing in the provision of assistance and care. So they operate just in specific economic sector. Type B social cooperatives can operate in any sector of the economy, but they must include disadvantaged people. At least the 30% of disadvantaged people must be workers of the social cooperatives. these are some examples of social cooperative activities in Italy. So I told like educational services, nursery, kindergartens, vocational training, shelter home for women suffering violence, home care and assistance, and so on. I don't give you very much figures about social cooperatives. In Italy, I told you they're about 50,000, but I would like to focus on this. More than 440,000 workers work in social cooperatives in Italy. This is 3 times the number of employees of the Italian car industry. So it's a very, very big sector. Now, I would like just to go fastly on the community cooperatives, because as I told you, this was the picture that I showed you before. So changing the paradigm in the way you see marginalized people, well, we are experiencing exactly the same thing in changing the paradigm on watching marginalized areas. So cooperatives engaged in revamping local areas, for example, the difficult suburbs in the biggest city of the country, or rural and mountain areas. So we are already we collect a lot of experiences of community cooperatives. So those that are engaged in the revamping rural mountain areas and suburbs with a multi-stakeholder identity, but also they can operate in the multi-purpose sector of the economy. So they can operate integrating different sectors of the economy. This is something that is not allowed for any other type of social of cooperatives, but with the definition of community cooperatives, we are asking the legislator and the government to recognize the ability to those cooperatives to work in at the same time in the different sector of the economy. We have some experiences developed, for example, in the mountains of Piemonte. One of the most famous is Ostana. They were they started in revamping this village where there were not, for example, I can mention newborns for more than 40 years. They were able to bring back people in living that areas to renew the village, and now they manage a kindergarten in Ostana. And there are now, like this year, they celebrated the 30th child that were born in the last 10 years in the village. And like that, we have hundreds of community cooperatives that are spreading around Italy, especially on the mountain areas that were suffering these they were losing people and cities, and just the elderly people were still living there. And we are also fighting for a bill to recognize and to enable this new type of cooperatives to work and to fight the marginalization of certain areas. I mentioned just one other example to give you also the city dimension of social of community cooperatives. Trame di quartiere that operates in one of the most difficult suburbs of Catania. So in a city, they are committed in the revamp and empowerment of one of the most difficult suburbs of the city, with the engagement of the local population in activities, in taking kids from the streets and bringing them back in the schools, and setting up cultural activities and concerts and exhibitions, and engaging the local population and renewing historical buildings of the area. I would stop here.
Thank you so much, both of you, Valerio and Minsun, Before I pass the mic to our audience for questions, I was curious if after having heard from each other, if either of you had a question or a response you wanted to give about the models in Italy or South Korea. And if not, I'll invite the audience to share their questions.
So I can use a question. Okay. I didn't mention in my presentation because I think we are running out of time, but I would like to thank you, Minsun, for this example also on social enterprises, because we had a really new law that is still in process for implementation in Italy, dating back in 2017, but it's not still fully operative. But for example, in that case, social enterprises in Italy is a label that any enterprise can use, but a social enterprise is not for profit. So if it is my understanding that in Korea, it is for profit too, a social enterprise. Okay, so this is really strange.
Yep.
It's strange as a model because we refer with social enterprises, there's a debate on the model, but one pillar is they should be not for profit too.
Right. Well, that's why. So social enterprises have a for-profit and non-profit. But social cooperatives cannot be. So, you see so that's why a lot of sort of the social enterprises are moving on to social cooperatives. And I keep thinking about why, and also another also notion. So when you actually are recognized as a social enterprise, you are actually obligated to hire a marginalized community, right? 30% of your actually employees have to come from those marginalized community. So for example, one of my best friends, she is one of those who are working at the social enterprises. However, they are not the members of that enterprise as the owner. They are actually getting very shorter contract term. So their job is very precarious, right? So I was thinking maybe that could be one of the reasons that some of the social enterprises want to give them more voices to the members and the marginalized members. And that's why they are converting their enterprise into social cooperatives. So that was actually one of the key reasons why actually Dounuri became a social cooperative, because they want to create that democratic workplace culture, so that all those members are acting as the owners and members of the co-op.
Thank you. Minsun, did you have a question for Valerio? Otherwise, I'll take Kent's question from the chat.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, Valerio, what kind of sort of challenge that you see from social cooperative sectors in Italy? And where is the government in supporting social cooperatives? Because as you know, depending on also the government, some progressive governments will give more support to this kind of social enterprise and social co-ops, but where are you in terms of supporting them politically in Italy? Right now, South Korea is not doing very well. That's why.
Okay, so we have an hour, right? No, kind of my work is advocacy, so and it's well, in 15 years of work, we never experienced like a supporting government of any color. So that's I would say so, and we are used to not to depend in like in one supporting, one not. So in like interact and really advocate for the sector. It's impossible to not see what's on the table, so that you have hundreds of thousands of workers and you have millions of users that are assisted thanks to social cooperatives. So that's sometimes that different view. In this sense, I must say that general interest sectors became kind of mainstream. So it's for sure a challenge. So it's not the early days of social cooperatives now. In a sense, we are seeing something that is really interesting. Our associates in the last 4 or 5 years it's also one of the consequences of COVID or the pandemic, but not just that. There were a lot of mergers. So they are like consolidating. So we see like a lowering number of associates and enterprises operating, but a growing number of employees and a growing number of turnover and a growing number of people assist. I think it's a good sign, but they also must take the challenge of if you're the only player of the game, you set the rules and you see what's good and what's not. In the moment that others are luckily learning to fulfill the general interest. For example, this debate on social enterprises in Italy. So in some case, social enterprises and social cooperatives are in the same economic sector. So other limited liable enterprises, for example, or association, assuming the definition of social enterprises, can operate in the same sector. So there's still also a challenge of being having impact. Still, the impact is a term that everyone is using. So even corporates are into SDGs. Even big enterprises in any facility industry are into terms that once were just owned and used by social cooperatives and those like operating as volunteers in association. Now it's and it's a good thing, but it's something that you must manage with really with attention. I just say like few things because otherwise I would be really, very long.
The next two questions you're welcome to respond to as well, Valerio and Minsun, and I'm going to invite Professor Jerome Hughes and Elias Crim to weigh in as well. Kent, I don't know if you want to come off mute and share your question you put in the chat.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me okay? So I'm a federal person and I'm from rural America in North Dakota. I lived on a family farm and cooperatives, you kind of were breathing cooperatives. So I kind of was in the pool, and you don't know water if you're in the water, but it was all around me. But it didn't dawn on me what actually cooperatives were in a framework until I got into my doctoral program. And I actually studied a fair amount about the social cooperatives in Italy. So thank you, Valerio, for this in-depth kind of walk through all of that, the beautiful things that are happening in Italy. So my question really is the main premise in America is we don't have the legislation and the grounding and the foundation. I think there's foundational certainly for cooperatives, but I think to bring it on and to have that onlay over social issues that are happening in our country, I think social cooperatives are such a good fit. But how then do we start? So I mean, we need momentum. We need a jump start in terms of getting something started, and we can't wait for legislation. That's a 20-year process, perhaps, right? 1991, right, in Italy. So how do we jumpstart that? And maybe I'll just kind of take it, take your comments from there. And like you say, we could talk all day about that kind of thing, but I'm interested in kind of how we start without it taking so long.
Jerome, do you wanna? Oh, go ahead.
I don't know who's moderating the question. So if just decide who's answering.
Well, Elias or Jerome, would you like to share? Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a kind of a theory about this. The way to jumpstart it, which is not exactly a jump, it's more like a long distance run, given the nature of this work, is to build things on the ground, build models as close as we can come to the ideal, as we're also advocating. So I was reading that, in the history of the New Deal in the 30s, the impression a lot of people have is it was kind of a top-down thing, bunch of people sat in boardrooms and just made up stuff. It appears that actually the history of the New Deal is that it was an effort to take what was already working. So the more that we can build things that are projects that are already working, whether we call them nonprofits or social enterprises or whatever, until we get to this legal form, at least we're demonstrating how this works, and we're creating advocacy and kind of a shared energy and momentum around this. And in a couple of conversations I've had with other folks, for example, in Italy, they were saying, you know, the way this happened was that the field work was already done. The legislation just enshrined what we were already doing. So we have a temptation to think there might be an electric switch we could throw in Washington and suddenly all this work would happen. It almost anywhere you look, it's always the opposite. You build from the bottom and then you get legitimized. So that would be my thought on the path that we're probably embarking on here.
Yeah, so just to build off those comments, I mean, if we look at what's happening on the ground, like, I mean, there are already sort of forms of social cooperatives, like, you know, there's a very vibrant nonprofit community that works with incubating cooperatives, you know, particularly mission-driven among low-income populations. And so that's, you know, that's happening, and, you know, just getting them more attention and more support can continue to expand those efforts. You know, philanthropy is always important there. I would also be amiss to not talk about sort of the worker self-directed cooperatives that the Sustainable Economy Law Center has been promoting and advancing, and we see a number of those occurring, you know, happening in the context of nonprofits, expanding sort of the democratic focus of those nonprofits, and more generally, like many sort of charitable nonprofits, you know, effectively operate as multi-stakeholder cooperatives, right? So there's already, you know, that occurring in the world. I mean, I think the big question just comes around to like, what are the kind of legal sort of, if there's a unique legal form, and, you know, and there's a question of like, do we actually need a unique legal form? You know, in some state, like when you think about legal forms, one part you think about like is that the states sort of provide for specific entity forms. And so some states provide for types of nonprofit cooperatives. And then you think about sort of the federal tax level, right? Like, does the federal tax level provide for this? And that's some of where my questions sort of get to, is like, can we sort of get something that stands as a 501c3 tax exempt entities? And then can we get more of these kind of potentially nonprofit cooperative statutes in states? And, you know, so I guess circling back, there's already a lot of work going on around this. And then, you know, and so the question is like, do we need something else that incentivizes and support and promotes, allows for the development of these social cooperatives in the US context?
Thank you so much. Minsun, I see you're taking notes. I was wondering if there was anything you wanted to share with your experience also working on social co-ops in the US.
Yeah, I'm an actually social co-op developers, and one big project that I'm working on right now is a drivers co-op cooperative, and I can definitely see why we do need actually social cooperative, because although a lot of nonprofits are actually incubating the cooperative, there are a lot of complexities around, you know, who's doing what piece. But if we can kind of simplify the process and make this social cooperative, drivers cooperative Colorado, for example, become a social cooperative, right? Then we'll actually be designated as a nonprofit. In this way, we can also get tax exempt. That will be also good. And then also we can also provide our drivers very high wages, which is the goal of actually our social cooperatives. So I can see a lot of benefits that can happen, but because of the fact that we don't have the law, it is very chaotic situation. It's very complicated for any nonprofits to actually incubate the cooperative and continue to support the system. So I think just creating sort of the category of social cooperatives make everybody's life easier. I think we are here in the same goals here, right? But why do we make so many different steps? Because there's no legislations, there's no categories of social cooperatives. So my point is that let's make one here in the United States. We don't know how to get there, but again, we have a lot of community organizations that are already working to incubate different co-ops for the marginalized communities. And I think that is a good starting point, because while working on those issues, you know what issue you actually run into on a daily basis. It is a tax issue. There are so many other issues, right? In as a social co-ops, we just cannot have a lot of funding support, right? Because, you know, a lot of foundations will not give funding to the cooperatives. So we have to go through the nonprofit. So I think there are a lot of chaos. So my point is that let's make it a little bit simplified process. And we do really need to do it because already many organizations are working with marginalized communities. So it's a good time for us to ignite that kind of a grassroots movement here in the US.
Go ahead.
Is that me? Yeah, I just wanted to add that Minsun and I are launching a community of practice around this topic. As you can tell, there are a lot of moving parts here. There's, for example, just to break it into two big pieces, there's one, what is a social co-op and how would we build one? And number two, what does that mean for my particular area of interest? Let's say it's childcare. Let's say it's elder care. Let's say it's immigrant services. Those are all different universes. So they're all going to have different kinds of practices within them. So trying to put that together as best we can, we're going to launch a monthly meetup called Community of Practice starting on September the 4th. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the registration for that. And it'll be at least a beginning on getting people together who are interested in the subject and want to help each other kind of co-create whatever we think needs to happen here.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think the next question from Cheryl might be best answered by Elias and Valerio. I don't know, Cheryl, if you wanted to come off mute and ask it, otherwise I can read it from the chat.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I was asking about whether Italy has made any movement on community cooperative legislation yet. And I was mentioning that I was there last year and we met a community cooperative that basically had just used the bylaws of a social cooperative, that they like borrowed the bylaws to construct their bylaws under the social co-op model. But they were interested in and wanted to see some community cooperative legislation.
We are, I assume I'm a stanza. We are currently in a table, in a debate with the Ministry of for the definition of a bill. So there's not a national framework law, but we are like defining it. So I have the draft, but it's not approved yet, and could change, of course. What happens today is that in practice, and that I refer to this also because it can be interesting in how to start social cooperatives in US. Maybe it's the same situation. They're using the form of different types of social of cooperatives. Can be social in many cases, can be worker cooperatives, can be users. In some rural areas, the first action to fight marginalization is to keep the store open, to keep the bar open. So citizens like associate, engage, and also hire directly the person that can keep the bakery open, for example. So it's also form the really new thing here is the commitment to a certain areas that we can define and recognize as marginalized. So a social cooperatives can operate in any part of Italy and also at the same time in Rome, in Milan, and in Venice, let's say. This doesn't happen very often, but they can do that. A community cooperative is the one really committing just to one area. And that there's an agreement that's also a thing about the bill. There's an agreement that mountain areas are disadvantaged. So no one can deny that. Everyone is living mountains in Italy. They're just ghost villages there. There are living there just elderly people that are struggling to live there. They do not receive assistance. So there's a common agreement that that's, of course, something that community cooperatives can operate. There's a debate if, for example, rural areas or suburbs can be defined as a disadvantaged and marginalized area where community cooperatives can operate. So we're in a debate like this. But we have some local laws, some region recognized, but the fact in Italy that every region set his own law without a national framework means that Puglia has a completely different definition from Abruzzo and from Piemonte, and the half of region do not have any law at all. So that's the chaos we're in. But let me say, I don't want to sound too much optimistic, but by the end of the year, maybe we would have the framework law approved.
Congratulations. Fingers crossed. And I'm using my moderator privilege to put myself on stack and ask a question, which is, why is it important to define a social cooperative as a separate model from a worker cooperative? What is further protected, or what is potentially lost by doing so? And Minsun in particular, I was really interested in hearing how the benefits of a cooperative could extend to its retired members, if you could say more about that. Thank you. And anyone can answer my question. Give me an eyebrow or a raised hand. Go ahead, Minsun.
Yes. So social cooperatives in South Korea are multi-membership structures. So worker cooperatives have only one, right? Workers are the members, but the social cooperatives in South Korea have to be a multi-membership structures. At least you have to have at least 2 different categories. That's why we have worker members, right? And then there are also supporters or the retirees. And those people can be part of the membership structure as well. So why actually they don't go with just a worker co-op, but why they will go with the social cooperatives? I think in my view, there are many different kinds of the worker co-ops in South Korea as well. But social cooperatives, in my view, is really, they come with a different mission statement that the members of the social cooperatives will come from marginalized communities who have obstacles in getting jobs. So, so that could be one of the key reasons that they want to actually separate those 2 out, because then, social cooperatives, by being defined as a social cooperatives, that, okay, everybody understands that social cooperatives are actually advancing that public purpose, right? That is really public interest. You have to advance public interest goal. So social cooperative is a much larger concept than worker co-ops. That's kind of how I see it. And that's why it's important, because if you really look at our situation here, which cooperative will need most support? Think about that, right? The people who are coming out of the prisons are the people who need more support, right? In creating a cooperatives. And they're perfect people to be part of the social cooperatives, right? So by having the categories, I think there is more possibility of more support system coming to these cooperatives. And I just want those marginalized communities to get the benefit and more support more than any others. So multi-membership structures and also social mission, a stronger social mission. I think those two are the difference.
Yeah, and also to kind of build on Minsun's, I mean, if you just think about cooperatives, it could be different types, like housing cooperatives. So a social cooperative could be a housing cooperative, among like the broader range of cooperatives. So that's sort of, one reason you might want it broader than just a definition of worker cooperatives. And in terms of like the social purpose public interest, as Minsun was saying, around like there's particular populations that we want to make sure that we're sort of targeting, especially if we're providing incentives, really robust incentives and those sorts of things. And so, for my research, the question has really sort of been on this question of like, what would it take to get 501c3 status for social cooperatives? And, one part of that, like there was a question that earlier about like how do we really just sort of drive this. Like you could think that, okay, if we change, get some federal legislation in place, that would be one way to do it, and of course that would be one way to do it. I mean, the other way a number of laws get changed, particularly tax laws, is just like the regulations or the guidance changes inside the agency. And so for me, the question has been like, is there a way to look at 501c3 status and to see whether it's already possible to just to interpret things in ways so that you could get the guidance changed maybe before the legislation was actually changed. And so, so with that, my question sort of turned on like, what would it take to qualify, have a social cooperative sort of qualify for sort of the exempt or charitable purposes under 501c3 status. And I think this sort of strong linkage to sort of the poverty and disadvantage status of the participants helps you to get there. There's, case law and others that really say that like there's particular exemptions that's provided if you focus on sort of, poor and disadvantaged populations, the relief of sort of the exempt purpose of relief of the poor, which would then be attached to other sort of purposes like education, reducing sort of burdens on government, those sorts of things. And then the second question, around this question of getting sort of 501c3 status is like, would it meet these charitable limitations? And, like the one that everyone thinks about is sort of the non-distribution constraints. It's, lawyerly terms, we talk about like private inurement, right? And so, this question that we were talking about earlier around like, could you have for-profit social cooperatives? Like, when you think about that question, that sort of automatically would, strongly move you out of sort of, basically have you violating sort of the non-distribution constraint, violating sort of the private inurement doctrine, those sorts of things. I think in my research, when I looked at this and looked at the question, if we focused on poor and disadvantaged populations, and then if we looked at this sort of question around patronage, is patronage the same thing as for-profit? When you think about for-profit, it's a capital investment that you're returning sort of the investment on. When you think about patronage, it's because of often the participants' use. And the way patronage has been sort of generally defined is it's not sort of in the same category as sort of profit, sort of capital investment is. And so if you're giving patronage or you're having patronage distributed to low income populations, I sort of suggest that, hey, like this may not fall into what we consider sort of traditional private inurement. It might fall outside of that. And so that helps us to begin to move to say, okay, one, we got past exempt purposes. Two, we're starting to get past these sort of non-distribution constraints in federal tax law. And so maybe there's some space for us to start thinking about sort of some regulatory guidance in the tax that says, like if it looks like these specific things, then maybe we can, get to social cooperative without a sort of, overarching change in the federal tax law. So that's one sort of approach that I sort of have tried to take in terms of looking at the question, in terms of, again, trying to move us along the path of, having some incentives related to social cooperatives.
Go ahead, Minsun. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, I think, we've been actually discussing internally with the Drivers Co-op. By the way, my organization is launching the Drivers Co-op Colorado. So this patronage issue is one big discussion. But think about this. we are actually giving our workers 80% of the fare, right? And then 20% come back to the co-op. Is there any possibility that actually our co-op will ever get to tons of patronage that is available to redistribute back to the workers? Because the assumption is that we are already giving them 80% of the fare upfront, right? So the issue of actually patronage is become minor for us, right? Because they want immediate benefit. And that's kind of how we could use it too. Instead of kind of going with a sort of, co-ops has this patronage distribution, that's all good. But with the social cooperatives, with the marginalized communities, we don't need to actually have that one, as long as we provide our members good living wages and salaries, right? That is how actually Korea social cooperatives function, because they don't need to have a lot of profits at the end of the year, because already those profits were distributed back to the members in the form of wages and income. And that's why I think we can definitely solve the problems. But that's how I feel. But again, we need a more discussion and study. But I think there is a way to do it, and I think perfectly that we don't need to actually distribute the patronage because we are part of the nonprofit, and I think we can still do so. But
Go ahead, Elias.
I just want to add one thing quickly. In the background here that we haven't quite touched on is a reality that in Italy, in South Korea, in Quebec, which I've been looking into, there's also infrastructure there, something that I hope that we'll have a future conversation with the US Federation about. So it's great that Maureen, you and Esteban and other folks are here. In Italy, as Valerio would tell us, there are 3 big consortia, 3 big national level organizations whose job it is to develop this work and to create co-ops and to finance them and to offer them technical assistance. And in fact, not only at the national level, but at the regional level, and even down to the local level, there are many of these consortia, as they're called, organizations that help this ecosystem develop. We don't have very much of that by comparison. It's amazing how much the Italians and the folks in Quebec and the folks in South Korea have built around this. But this is a big missing piece that has to come as well in order that we can make this complicated work easier to get into, because it fights against the system that we're all kind of caught in this country. So that's another major subject, and we're beginning to think about that, and we'll be talking about that in the community practice that I dropped in the chat.
Valerio, do you want to respond?
Yeah. On this consortium, I must say it's an important thing to highlight, but I was myself board member of one of the national consortium, the most important CGM. It can be true for a season, let me say. What we are seeing now is that the grassroots cooperatives are luckily becoming stronger. Sometimes the victim of the strong cooperative is the first level consortium. So sometimes we see some consortium transforming themselves into cooperatives, because they were ruling out so many activities for their cooperatives that they englobated like the bottom part, and they became cooperatives themselves. It's also a trick of the Italian legislation. It's like a consortium that has more employees, more than the cooperative associated, so it becomes senseless. And at the same time, some consortium are let's say, merging, also ceasing their activity. So for a period, for the very first blossoming of cooperatives, it was true that they had this development role of creating new cooperatives. And now that there was a mix of tools that we have, and so many in Conf Cooperative, we had like 270 consortia, which is incredible amount of consortia. It's more of we have 20 regions. Imagine we have so many, and they differ so much from, they were like interacting at local level. Some others were like associating cooperatives for very specialized purposes. So there was a mix. The most specialized survived. We also saw the growth of a lighter network tools. So like networks of enterprises or cooperatives instead of consortium that are a way heavier society, a way heavier enterprises than a network. So just this. And I recall just one thing that Minsun, this also the passepartout of this speech, of this part of the speech is the season. Another thing of a season is that concerning the retiring employees, social cooperatives were also something that determined the engagement of a certain generation. We have thousands of employee members of workers that are turning 60 something, that are retiring. A lot of them. There's luckily a new generation of cooperators that are coming up. We have imagine those starting a cooperative in 70s and 80s. Now they were 20 at that time. Now the majority of them is retiring. The majority, and a lot of them want to stay. That's why in some cases the thing became tricky, because there's no like a way for a former worker to stay member of the cooperative. So one thing is they become volunteers, so they completely change their status, but we don't have like the former worker member of the cooperative. So it's also a thing of the correct status of participation in the cooperative. So a lot of them are still really engaged. Sometimes we give the advice of creating like an association on the side of the cooperative to get this engagement pure and active, and to interact with a cooperative with a legal person, not an individual person.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing back into the conversation my question around retiring employees. I saw there's one more question from Anne Gensenberg in the chat. I didn't know if you wanted to come off mute as well. In the case that they stepped away, I'm going to read it, but Anne, this goes out to you. I'm curious, for the folks working on developing social co-op models in the States, has there been consideration of the Federal Labor Standards Act to allow non-citizens or folks who can't work as an employee to be members? And anyone's welcome to address it.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter, when you actually create cooperatives, it doesn't matter with the legal status of the citizenship. So cooperatives will allow anyone to be part of that membership. It could be a different, I mean, Jerome can talk more about that. A lot of undocumented immigrants will use a form of LLC to create a worker co-ops, and that will also apply to the social cooperative as well. Jerome, do you see this could be a problem, Eric, if actually they are part of the nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be something we need to look at more closely. I do know, when people are forming cooperatives, they might choose a form based upon what it does in terms of employment status versus ownership status and things of that nature. But, that would be something we would need to look at more closely. So.
Thank you. Does anyone else from the audience have a question, or anyone from the Federation staff who's been listening in? While you gather your thoughts, if any of the presenters today have questions for each other, you're welcome to just come off mute and ask. You've been listening to some really interesting things that you've each been saying as well.
I'm just curious how actually people are thinking about creating a classification of social cooperatives. One of the criticisms that we are start getting is that, well, we don't need another new categories of social cooperatives. So I would like to kind of hear from you about, is it really something that we are wasting our time? I've been very blunt, but I just want to hear your perspective, because for me, I think we do need this one. Social cooperatives will have a tremendous benefit for the communities. But do you really see that because of the fact that we have many different kinds of cooperative, including social enterprise, including B Corps and whatnot, we don't need another category? And I'm just curious how you think about this categorization and new terms about social co-op.
And I want to jump in and add an attachment to that question, which is one of the criticisms I've heard is lack of trust in nonprofits as an institutional partner. If you could address that as part of your answer to Minsun's question as well. Thank you. Go ahead, Valerio.
Yes, I was born in 1982, so the way they convinced in 1991 to create a new category, it's something that I read on the books. I had the chance to meet some of them in person, and that they are really visionary. But there was also a generation of people that were experiencing directly that something different was happening. Felice Scalvini, some of the really founding fathers of the social cooperative movements were, and this also recalls to what's happening in the US now, doing something with existing tools. There was a lot of worker cooperatives, but the way they were different from the existing worker cooperatives. And there were a lot of association. So at the time, a lot of people was using the association form. But then there was something like an agreement among also about legislators. So there were deputies and senators that were in Italy, like in US, you have the senator from that part of the country and that district, and they had like families assisted, part of them assisted by social cooperatives, and someone already started to call themselves that way. But the debate was very long. So if you imagine, it went all along the 80s, and it ended up in the 1991. But the thing I can tell you by the book I read and the people I met, luckily I met the people that were deciding to do this. But it's similar to my work today, for example, on community cooperatives. That's why I was really happy to mention it. Or, for example, we also were among the in the debate on social enterprises, on the reform of social enterprises. So sometimes you succeed in convincing the government and the parliament that something really new is needed. Actually, I must say, sometimes we see the opposite in Italy. That you always have to say that one thing is the very first thing, the very first person doing something that you have already seen 1,000 times. So the think of something new, it's not not a claim. It's a claim that it's used very often. Maybe sometimes it's just a claim, but sometimes it's useful to use it for something that is concrete, like community cooperatives. In the case of community cooperatives, as I told you, you provide like examples, you provide success, you get people to understand and to touch that something different and new is happening, and they get convinced. It's not an easy road. What I see from it's not the first time that I have the discussion with US on how to do that in your country. For sure, the let's say institutional architecture, what is set at federal level and what is set at state level, it's very different from Italy, from France, from Spain, from even from UK. That is, of course, is Anglo-Saxon and common law regime, but for example, doesn't have this heavy role of states compared to federal. So I think that for US, you must struggle to find a way to make something and to scale something and you're doing that. It's good that, but in a way or another, you must set up your set of rules to make the thing bigger and heavier, to make the growth of we call them, you can use also another name. You cannot call them social cooperatives, but you must find the purpose that it's of general interest. And of course, I must say the cooperative identity is important. So it's democratic, it's participatory. I heard about a lot of worker-owned social cooperatives of the workers of the healthcare sector that are taking their the power of their enterprises and to provide the care and assistance in a better way and with better wages. And that's something incredible. You can call it the way you want, but it's democratic, it's participatory, it's for a fairer economy, it's for a fairer society, and it's good. That's I must say is the most important thing. Maybe using the term social cooperatives in US don't bring you anywhere. Not because it's bad or good, but because it doesn't fit very well in your let me say institutional scheme.
Valerio, I appreciate your answer, and I am going to quickly pass the mic to Jerome, even though I feel fired up and could listen to you talk for another half hour. So we can close out. If you'd like to have the last word, Jerome, before I pass the mic to Tehmina to share what's next.
Jerome, no, I'm good.
Okay, then I'll pass to Tehmina, and thank you again, everyone.
Wow, what an energizing conversation. I want to give another thanks to our presenters. Thank you, Valerio, for coming in on your time off to talk about this. And just to wrap up, I'll share some resources. I'll speak them out loud, and Maureen is going to share them in the chat. So first of all, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is a part 2 conversation. We do have a recording to part 1, which is being dropped into the chat. You can check that out. To everyone who attended and registered, the link to this recording will also be sent out, so you'll have access to both the recordings. Secondly, there's opportunities to keep the conversation going. for folks who may not know yet or are not yet registered, in just a few weeks, we're holding our National Worker Cooperative Conference in Chicago. And on the Friday of that conference, September 12th, Minsun and Elias are presenting a session on social co-op. So there's a link being dropped in for the schedule, and on that website you can also find the registration link. Elias mentioned a community of practice that's starting September 4th on social co-ops and this social economy. There's a link being dropped in the chat to join that community of practice and keep the conversation going. And lastly, please take just 2 minutes to fill out the feedback form. It really helps us learn what resonates with our participants and how to improve our webinar and shared learning opportunities for the future. And I would love for everyone who was able to come on camera so we can say goodbye collectively and wrap up this fantastic webinar. Thanks again for everyone for being here, for engaging. It was a small group, but I think we had some awesome exchange of ideas, questions asked. So thanks again for everyone's presence and the work that's being done across the world. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.